So, this is supposed to be the year. Welcome to the bathtub of peculiarities, by the way. Welcome to the bathtub of peculiarities. Um, this is supposed to be the year of the otaku, but the term otaku is poorly defined, and I've been wondering what is the usefulness of otaku as a category? What do we mean when we say it? Um, that kind of thing. Is it a category? What kind of category is it? I have a few theories. Um, so number one would be otaku as a word just means nerd. It's just the Japanese word for nerd. It's just the same thing, which would do it has explanatory power because it means you can make sense of there being stuff like train otaku and military otaku and all of these different kinds of otaku in the same way you might say someone is a train nerd or a military nerd or whatever. It has a lot of similar connotations. It makes a lot of sense. The word otaku is just a translation of the word nerd into Japanese, or they mean the same thing. It's not a direct translation because otaku comes from the Japanese second person pronoun, which like literally translates to your house, but is used as a second person pronoun in parts of West Japan. Um, but that's not super relevant. Um, of course, there is an issue with saying, well, otaku is just means nerd, which is that you're missing out in the context that it is a Japanese word, and we are not speaking Japanese presently. We're speaking English. Why use the Japanese word instead of just the English word nerd? Because, well, there's something else at play here, which is that the word otaku in an English context means generally something to do with people who are nerds about something Japanese. And it's different from just being a general Japanophile, right? It's more specifically about Japanese nerd culture, this thing called otaku culture. We'll get back to that in 1 second. But that's kind of a reason why I think it's a little, you can't just simply say otaku means being a nerd about Japanese things. If you're a train nerd who is into Japanese trains, but you're not Japanese yourself, are you an otaku? Would you self-describe as an otaku? Maybe. If you said, I'm an otaku to another person, do they expect this is someone who's into Japanese trains? Or do they expect this is someone who likes anime? They probably suspect the second one. They probably think it's someone who's into anime. So it seems like there's a connotation with the word otaku, not just towards Japan, but towards a specific subsection of Japanese culture. What is that subsection? We'll talk about this in a second. Um, another option would be, looking at how the word is used. Again, it seems to describe people who are interested. Like the common denominator of the Western usage of the Japanese word otaku is that it describes people who are anime fans, who watch anime, um, who are passionately engaged with anime. Not just watch anime, but people who are passionately engaged with anime. Um, how do we define any of that, right? How do we define passionately engaged? Like, do we just use a system of self-ID? An otaku is someone who claims to be an otaku? I don't think so, because anyone can say anything, and that doesn't make anything a thing, right? I think that otaku has to have something to do with what you do. No one would. It would be strange, as I said previously, if someone described themselves as an otaku, you would expect them to do certain things, to adhere to a certain expectation of. I don't really know what it is. The next. So I suppose the truth is, or maybe it's something to do with a relation to a specific subculture rather than just a specific medium. I mean, obviously, the question of what even is anime is a valid question. It's only a Japanese colloquialism. what is it beyond that? Is, Pingu and anime, the classic memes. I think otaku must mean someone who engages with a particular Japanese subculture, which is otaku subculture. Just like a punk is someone who engages with punk subculture, a member of the punk subculture. But in fact, otaku is not an individual. Otaku is a name for a subculture of which individuals can be members. Just like a punk is a member of the punk subculture, but one lonely punk doesn't mean anything. Does that make any sense? They are defined in relation to a subculture. Perhaps this is the case for otaku also. Otaku, it's not something as vague as just simply nerd because it relates to something specifically Japanese, but it's not just Japan in general. Someone who's very interested in Shinto religious practices or Japanese trains or, Japanese golden age cinema is not an otaku. It's a specific subculture that was born in Japan, a specific Japanese subculture which has specific mediums and exports products, like I say, specific products, specific works of art that it produces. This is otaku. Otaku is something to do with being in relation with the subculture, being a member of the subculture or being in relation to the subculture somehow. But what does that exactly mean? And this is where I get to the real question. Like, is it possible even to be an otaku in the West? Is it even possible? Right? Because many key tenets of otaku subculture in Japan aren't accessible unless you are in Japan, right? It is a geographically concentrated subculture. It is a thing that happened in a place, or perhaps is still happening. This is another question. Does otaku still exist? Does otaku still exist, or was otaku a thing that happened, a period of time? Who knows? The same question can be asked of any subculture. If the sort of otaku signifiers that you'll find in media, your Konata Izumis, your Kirinos, these otaku characters in anime, your Otaku no Video, your Welcome to the NHK, your Genshi-ken, your Comic Party, all of these references, they all contain common markers of belonging to the subculture, and those markers are very frequently geographically specific. Staying up late to watch late night anime on TV, for example, going to Akihabara, going dojin shopping, going to Comiket, these producing dojins, being a member of a dojin circle, picking up new eroge releases on release day in Akihabara, going to idol concerts, doing watergay, you know, participating, let's just draw a line there. There are more, but let's draw a line there, right? These are simply not accessible if you're not in Japan. These are not things you can do from outside of Japan. You can't go to Akihabara without going to Japan first, because Akihabara is located in Japan. You can't, there is no, you know, animate, there is no animate shop to go to outside of Japan. Well, maybe, I don't know if it has other locations, but it definitely doesn't exist in where I live. Maybe it has, I don't know if animate exists in other parts of Asia or something, but it definitely exists in Japan. It definitely does not exist in the UK or the US. Maybe I don't know if it exists in the US. I'm assuming it doesn't. Um, you can't participate in Dojin culture. Really, you can't go to Comiket without going to Japan first. You know what I mean? Like, Comiket is located in. So the question is, like, if these are the like essential components of otaku culture, then what does it mean to be an otaku if you don't have access to these things? So then, I think we have to accept the possibility that there actually is more than one otaku. right? There is something which is specifically Japanese otaku, and then there is something else which is a Western otaku, or perhaps also there's something else which is like a Southeast Asian otaku, and these are different things. These are different things. They are related things, but they are cultures that evolved separately. With honestly, especially previous to pretty surprisingly recently, without that much communication between them, right? Um, you know, Perhaps a key tenet of Western otaku culture, going to anime conventions, anime conventions aren't some, this is not the particular form of the Western anime convention is kind of unique. It doesn't necessarily exist in the same way with the same cultural weight in Japan. Or another huge one, the culture around fan subbing and summoning through illicit means. Anime absolutely doesn't exist in Japan, but it is a huge part of what it means to be an otaku in the West. And that, again, staying up late to watch anime on TV doesn't exist in the West, but in the West we have stuff like an entirely different culture around quantity, around marathoning, around like my anime list. There are Japanese equivalents to these things, but as far as I can tell, they don't necessarily have the same degree of centrality in Japan as they do in the West. They have, as far as I can tell, this kind of attitude of catching up. You know what I mean? But in Japan, there is also like I think something that Westerners don't realize when you first have the revelation like, oh wait a minute, anime happens on TV in real time in Japan, but week by week, like this is going to have a huge effect on the way Japanese otaku interact with anime. The second thing you learn is that anime on TV is about equal parts new anime and reruns. They are constantly running reruns of anime on TV. Anime reruns are huge in Japan. Evangelion didn't even get popular until its first rerun. Reruns are a huge thing. So there is still this level of curation by TV stations and these sorts of things, which don't exist in the West. There are entire mediums in Japan that get almost no attention in the West. The audio drama CD, right? Huge in Japan, virtually non-existent in Western communities. Radio, like radio stations hosted by Seiyu and people who are important to otaku tastemakers, otaku curators, people like Mafia Kajita and these kinds of individuals. The sort of celebrity otaku. It's a thing in Japan. It's a huge thing in Japan. It doesn't exist in the West. In the West, we have these things called anitubers, right? And at least we used to. There are still anitubers, but they're weird now, right? This is not a thing in Japan. Doesn't exist in the same way in Japan. Video essays, not a thing as far as I can tell on Japanese YouTube. Like nowhere near as popular. Kind of, or they're kind of a different thing on Japanese YouTube. Like video essays are kind of a different thing. They don't really exist. Like they have a very different culture around them. Japanese YouTube has a very very different culture. The Japanese internet has a different way. You know, Perhaps as I see it, looking in from the outside, the Dojin culture is the centralizing aspect of Japanese otakudom. Consuming like if you're a deep level otaku, that is represented by participating in some way in Dojin culture. the central otaku event is a doujin market. You know, um, physical shops sell doujin. You have websites, DL sites, stuff like this which sell doujin, right? Doujinshi. Um, you have people who participate in doujin circles, not something that really exists in the West, at least not to the same degree. Maybe we have fan art. Maybe we, for some shows, for some media properties, for some intellectual properties, you get fan fiction, written fan fiction. I know, particularly with properties that are popular with women and the BL crowd, fanfics are more common. There is a lot. There is a lot of Boku no Hero Academia fanfics. I know that much. Other than that, I'm afraid this isn't my area of expertise. But it's different. It's a different thing. Um, you know, would a Japanese? I've talked about this before, and I've kind of been rambling for a bit too long. So let's kind of slightly move on. Does this preclude anyone in the West from being an otaku, or does this just mean that otaku is not just one category, but an umbrella for multiple different categories? And in a way, we've known this is true the whole time because we already know that there are army otaku, there are eroge otaku, there are military otaku, there are, etc., etc. There are all of these different kinds. Tetsudomania, there are all of these different kinds of otaku. Is it such a leap to suggest that under that otaku is bigger than just Japanese otaku? Otaku is also separately in the same umbrella category Western otaku. Perhaps. But then, what is Western otaku? I'm sorry, I don't know. It seems like differently, like the Western otaku is something that maybe is defined completely differently from Japanese otaku. That Western otaku is mostly centered, like where Japanese otaku is around participating in subculture, Western otaku is about watching anime, which is two very different things. Western, in Japan, manga, like again, another thing, everyone knows this, I assume. Manga is way, way, way bigger than anime. Manga is a much, much bigger market than anime. Manga transcends otaku, like everyone reads manga, right? Whereas anime is a little more niche. It airs late at night. There are certain family, daytime, prime time anime. There's your children's anime in the morning, but the sort of otaku-oriented anime, the late-night anime, is not such a universal thing. Whereas in the West, anime is the centralizing core of the otaku community. And then on top of that, some people read manga. And on top of that, some people read visual novels. On top of that, some people do blah, blah, blah. This is a huge, huge difference between the two geographically separated, more importantly these days, linguistically separated otaku communities. My question really is, if that's the case, if this is where we've ended up, that in the West, all it means to be an otaku is to watch anime, then, or at the very least to be a passionate anime watcher, this is just very vague. It's not something that can be strictly delineated, right? If this is the case, of what use is it for me to run around calling other people, making this claim that so and so is a Norman, a fake otaku. So and so I am a true member of in group, unlike these falsifiers who are actually members of out group. Am I actually doing anything useful, or am I just feeding my own ego? I think as much as I would like to say, as much as it would make me feel good to be able to sit here and say, no, otaku actually has some deeper meaning. It's about being a database animal. It's about having delusions about characters. It's about liking the bad parts. It's about the dame, the no good. All of these theories about otaku. I think fundamentally there is no clear delineation. You can't make If you do something like that, you'll end up excluding too many people who should be included, and you'll end up including too many people who should be excluded. This is all just it's one of these things where it's like defining a chair. It's one of these things where it's just really really hard to draw a strict delineation. I think there may be levels of intensity you can talk about. You might be able to say some people are, some people are flatly non-otaku. Some people don't watch any anime. Some people don't engage with otaku subculture on any level. Then there are some people who it's like, okay, well, I don't know what you are, right? Like, let's take, I think, as a good example, Ludwig from video games, the Twitch streamer Ludwig. This guy is interesting to me. This guy, Ludwig, he has watched he's watched some anime. He actually has decent taste in anime. He likes Welcome to the NHK, for example. He likes Serial Experiments Lane, for example. His favorite anime is One Piece. I've never even seen One Piece. Does this make Ludwig more of an otaku than I am? How can we answer this question? If you go with the sort of most concrete, easiest answer, which is whoever's more of an otaku is whoever's seen more anime, then of course it's not even close. I don't know how many anime Ludwig has seen, but I would be willing to bet my entire net worth that it is not as much as I have seen. I would just be willing to bet that in terms of either raw hours or in terms of individual shows or individual episodes. I would be pretty willing to bet that I've seen more anime than him. But what does that mean? What does that mean? Because what if there's a not just quantitative but qualitative aspect to this? Like, what if it's not just about how much anime you've seen, but how passionate you are about anime? Something I find particularly interesting. So, does Ludwig count as an otaku? Does Ludwig count as an otaku? Maybe, maybe, maybe not. Honestly, I don't fucking know. I don't fucking know. He goes to anime conventions. He's cosplayed multiple times. He's learning Japanese. He's been to Japan. He owns anime figures and anime merchandise, mostly One Piece related. What does any of this mean? I don't know. It reminds me of the scene in El Manga Sensei where the main guy is like, yeah, I'm an otaku, and then one of the other characters is the like popular girl. She's like, oh yeah, I'm an otaku too. I love One Piece and stuff. And the main guy's like, you know, okay, okay, buddy, that's not what that's not what I meant. Um, so clearly that is some sort of a universal experience, right? But the thing is, there are other people who would say the same about me. There are other people who would look at my qualifications and say, so wait a minute, this guy's never been to Comic Cat, he doesn't speak Japanese, he's seen less than 1,000 anime, he hasn't seen this, and this classic, you know, and this guy is fake claiming, this guy calls himself an otaku, like he's a tourist at best. Like, and I could honestly see there's somewhat of a legitimate argument to be made there. Um, so, you know, what does any of this mean? To what degree is any of this useful? To what degree does the year of the otaku even make sense as a concept? Um, I don't have any clear answers. I'm starting to think that this like focus on this in-group out-group mentality that I have, this otaku versus normie, otaku versus the aju, binary opposition, in-group out-group thinking, is just an excuse to masturbate. It's just an excuse to feed my ego, to make me seem cool for being a part of something and an exclusive club. But in reality, all it does is, on the one hand, make me feel inadequate for not being as deep into it as other people. And to some extent, I will never be able to be that deep into it. So people, because I am both linguistically and geographically restricted from participating. On the other hand, it makes me feel, I can gas myself up and be like, all of these tourists, all of these Normans coming, what do they know? But really, is this actually good for me, or is this just making me depressed because I start thinking like, oh, the whole thing is being overrun by people who don't know anything, etc. All of these tourists are coming in, we need to gatekeep, and I just start getting, nihilistic about the whole premise. On the same side, something which I haven't even talked about, which I probably should have, which is this is really an addendum to my video about how the otaku culture I know is dead. This is really an addendum to that previous video. This is really a part two to that video, which is to say that otaku culture is constantly changing. What it meant to be an otaku in the 80s is completely different to what it meant to be an otaku in 2007, which is completely different to what it means to be an otaku right now. You know, these the same word is applied. There were similarities, but there were also significant, major differences. Um, what does any of this mean? Did the old school otaku during the moe boom make the argument that, oh, these new gens aren't real otaku? I haven't seen any evidence that they did. I haven't looked for any evidence that they did, but I would be very willing to bet that they did. There's also the level by which otaku is kind of a pejorative. A lot of people who might be otaku don't like to be called otaku. At least in the past they didn't. It may have changed to some degree. It seems to have changed. It seems to have changed, but it's still a bit of something to be embarrassed about to a lot of people. Is it something I should, what does any of this mean? I don't know. I think it might be best to stop, or at least chill out on some of this identity focused thinking. Like, is it possible that we can ever reach a true conclusion here? I think probably not. I think that to get a bit retarded here, if we put our Deleuzian hat on, I think that Deleuze is very helpful here. We're trying to do this arboreal thinking of trying to get to the root of otaku and then branching up into these subsections, trying to pin everything down into an otaku identity, into an essence, you know. But what if we took a more rhizomatic approach? What if, all of these things I've talked about, going to Comiket, watching anime, liking trains, something vaguely Japanese, a translation of the word nerd, just being a nerd in general with all of the personality quirks that implies, the translation of the phrase literally meaning your house, um, being on uh, the internet talking about something, right? Like participating in community, going to anime conventions, watching shitloads of anime, reading manga, reading visual novels, watching VTubers, enjoying the bad parts, being a database animal. Yeah, all of these various aspects, maybe they aren't necessarily. Maybe it's not useful to consider them as being in an arborescent arrangement of a tree trunk sprouting limbs where you can get to the root of things. Maybe they're in a rhizomatic arrangement where they all interconnect in a distributed network, and you will never find the core root of otaku because that's not worth thinking about. That's not a valid concept to begin with. The more valid concept is not to ask what, not to try and look into an essence, but to look into what does something do? What can something do? What, um, it's really been staring us in the face right away because we've been saying an otaku is someone who does X. That's most of what we've been doing this entire time. An otaku is someone who does X. Um, so perhaps the concept of otaku isn't as useful as just talking about the thing that you do. The otaku person is someone who does X. No, an otaku is someone who does Y. Maybe it's not so useful, but if you just identify as, if you just say, I'm someone who does X, I'm someone who does Y, then how is that any less useful than the framing, trying to identify an essence which is completely beyond identifying, you know? Um, I what do I do? What do I actively do? I watch anime. What do I actively do? I read manga. What do I actively do? I read visual novels. What do I actively do? I participate. I I I go on the internet and I talk about anime on anonymous forums. You know, what do I actually do? Well, I don't go to Comiket. I don't make dojins. I don't, etc. Um, maybe trying to maybe this is just a more useful way of thinking about things. Maybe because then it's is it the case that otaku culture is changing? Oh, it changed from the cool focused sci-fi pre-moe boom to the moe boom to the Naruto boom, isekai boom to VTubers and um, gotcha. Like, is that the case, or is it are these the same people? Is it the same guy? Is it one guy called John Otaku who in the 80s was really into Gundam, and then in the 2000s was really into Lucky Star, and then in the 2020s is really into Uma Musume? Is it the same guy? Is it the same guy? It's not. It's just not. It's not the same guy. It's different people who do different things and enjoy different things. There is no John Otaku, or there is no fucking um, Otaku Watanabe. there's there's no Otaku Watanabe. There's just a bunch of people doing a bunch of things, and they're doing stuff, and that's the important part, is that they're doing things, and we just pay attention to the things they're doing. I think that's better, because then what the real usefulness of these terms is to insult people, right? This is the real usefulness. The real usefulness is to gatekeep people we don't like and call them names. And it doesn't really work, but we feel it feels good. It gives us a sense of jouissance. Um, so instead of saying, you're, blah blah blah, you're a tourist, you're a real otaku like me, right? Which just gets into bogged down into debate. You just start saying facts. You haven't seen any shows. You don't know what you're talking about, buddy. Who are you? Just actually identify the things that people do and the things that they don't do and the things that they're incapable of doing. Um, there you go. There you go. There's something. There's something there. There's something here. I don't know what it is, but there's something here.